In the heyday of Hollywood, Westerns were more than simply films. They were a cultural phenomenon, and Gabby Hayes was the ideal sidekick for any cowboy who needed one. In his distinctive gravelly voice, he delivered unforgettable one-liners and sardonic advice while writing with legends like Randolph Scott and Roy Rogers. However, Gabby had stories behind his beard that he had never told anybody until today. Fans speculated about what actually transpired between Hayes and the renownedly private Randolph Scott for years. What caused their on-screen friendship to abruptly wane? Beyond border friendship, was there more going on behind the scenes? Gabby Hayes eventually spoke out after decades of keeping quiet, and what he said shocked everyone. Did you grow up watching classic Westerns? Comment 1 for yes or 0 if you're discovering them now, because what you're about to hear might change how you see both men forever. The truth behind their relationship. George Gabby Hayes' visage was one of the most instantly identifiable in the heyday of Westerns. He portrayed the devoted sidekick to some of Hollywood's most famous cowboys, with his disheveled beard, gravelly voice, and never-ending supply of darn tootin' catchphrases. However, under the foolish old-timer facade was a far more nuanced individual whose life unexpectedly and maybe closely intermingled with that of Randolph Scott, another Western film hero. Few ever realized the anguish, passion, and secrecy sewn into the fabric of Hayes' personal life, despite the fact that fans loved him for his endearing gruffness and hilarious timing. Fewer still were aware of his long-standing relationship with Scott, a man whose own life was shrouded in gossip, conjecture, and intense personal secrecy. Decades after both men's deaths, industry rumors, admissions from intimate confidants, and pieces of correspondence are now piecing together a lost tale. Perhaps more than just a tale of friendship. A tale of two guys negotiating identity, fame, and the psychological toll of being invisible. The unlikely rise of Gabby Hayes. Gabby's journey to fame was anything but straightforward. He was born George Francis Hayes in Wellsville, New York, in 1885. His father wished for him to pursue a career in law. Instead, following a dismal spell in minor league baseball, young George fled with a traveling stock business. He married vaudeville actress Olive Ireland there, and the two of them made a living traveling, singing, acting, and making ends meet. Hayes played a variety of parts under his given name for years, before a series of events in the early 1930s brought him into contact with the B-Western genre. There, he discovered his real vocation as the weather-beaten, tobacco-chewing sidekick rather than the starring guy. Renamed Gabby Hayes by the middle of the 1930s, he established himself as a mainstay of the genre and starred in more than 40 movies with Roy Rogers alone. Despite his cheerful exterior, Hayes was a serious, even depressed, person to those closest to him. After Olive passed away unexpectedly in 1957, Gabby started to isolate herself more. A more thorough analysis of his previous relationships, especially with Randolph Scott, started to emerge at this later time. Scott Randolph, the gentleman cowboy. From the 1930s until the 1950s, Randolph Scott was the epitome of towering, austere masculinity. Playing the hero in several Westerns, he had a commanding presence, sharp eyes, and sculpted cheekbones. A Southern gentleman by birth, he was quiet and well-groomed off-screen. However, Scott's private life remained unclear despite his notoriety and the great adoration of female followers. He openly dated women and was temporarily married. But the rumors circulating around Hollywood suggested otherwise. His lengthy and extraordinarily intimate connection with actor Cary Grant, with whom he lived in a beach house for 12 years, was the most prominent of these allegations, which fueled conjecture for decades. However, his previous connection with Gabby Hayes, which was formed in the late 1930s and early 1940s, was less well-known and much more secret. The Western Brotherhood. B-Westerns was a close-knit community based on demanding filming schedules, modest budgets, and a strong sense of camaraderie amongst the actors and crew. Hayes and Scott initially became close on the dusty backlots and isolated areas of California and Arizona. Despite their very different public personas, both men had a similar intensity on the inside, a silent, cautious manner of navigating the manufactured glamour of Hollywood. The two men's communication, which was discovered in the estate of a mutual acquaintance, reveals a level of intimacy uncommon among men of their time, much less in the macho world of Westerns. Hayes wrote to Scott in 1942, "The trail is long, but your presence makes the ride lighter." I never imagined that among the cowboys with guns, I would find a kindred soul. Scott's answers, however more taciturn, were as kind. There's comfort even in quiet, George, and I guess that's uncommon in our line of work. Living side by side in the shadows. The two stars would frequently withdraw to remote ranches or mountain cottages in between movie productions. In particular, a property tucked away in the hills above Burbank became into their haven, a place where neither had to act or hide behind a character. Those who worked with them started to notice their exceptionally strong bond, even though there is no concrete evidence that it was romantic. Helen Delancey, a makeup artist who worked on a number of Scott's movies, recalled that Randolph always seemed more at ease when Gabby was around. You could hear them laughing into the night when they were by themselves, even though they didn't talk much on set. But there was a price for the friendship. Both men had to exercise caution in a time when even the slightest suggestion of same-sex passion might destroy careers. Hayes had less to lose because he was already marginalized as a comedic relief character, but Scott needed to be extremely discreet since he was the starring man. The era of rumor and retrenchment. By the middle of the 1950s, both Westerns and the careers of many of their actors were starting to wane. After retiring in 1962, Scott produced a few last motion pictures. After leaving the movie business, Hayes started making appearances on television, most notably as the host of The Gabby Hayes Show, which is geared toward children. However, Hayes continued to live alone as Scott and his second wife, Patricia Stillman, moved into a tranquil retirement. In his last years, friends observed that he appeared haunted and preoccupied. A painful glimpse into Hayes's personal sorrow may be found in a 1959 letter written in a shaky hand. Sometimes I wonder if it was all worth the cost. Yes, I did laugh, but when I was by myself, the laughter always reverberated too loudly. The Final Ride. The final classic westerns were still struggling at the box office in 1969, the year Gabby Hayes died, at age 83. He passed away from heart failure. Randolph Scott lived until 1987 and passed away quietly in Beverly Hills when he was 89 years old. Following Hayes's passing, Scott made a rare comment in which he stated, "George was more than a colleague." It was one of the rare public recognitions of their relationship. He was a part of my life, the kind you don't replace. According to newly surfaced accounts and archived correspondence, Gabby Hayes once described Randolph Scott as the one man who saw past the character I played and knew the man I was trying to hide. Sources now suggest Hayes confided in Scott during some of his darkest personal battles, from grief after his wife's death to struggles with Hollywood's shifting values. In a rare, never-before-published interview from the 1950s, Hayes reportedly said, "I wasn't acting when I looked up to Randolph in those scenes. I really did." Their friendship, though never publicly paraded, was built on trust, vulnerability, and mutual respect, something rare in the competitive world of Western stars. The frontier within. The unspoken sacrifices made by many in early Hollywood are shown by the lives of Randolph Scott and Gabby Hayes. The true bravery may have been in how they handled their own facts in the face of public criticism, even as their movies praised lawmen, frontier daring, and devotion. Their friendship was important enough to reverberate through their work, communication, and the recollections of those who knew them, regardless of whether it was romantic or just the purest kind of platonic brotherhood. Re-examining the hidden lives of men like Hayes and Scott satisfies more than just curiosity in a society that is more accepting of the complexities of identity today. It recovers a secret heritage, one of gentleness, self-control, and the silent bravery to live according to oneself even when society would not permit it. If you're fascinated by old Hollywood legends and the untold truths behind the screen, subscribe now and join a community that honors the stories behind the stars. A successful life. Hayes played the role of the reliable sidekick for a large portion of his career, and he rode beside some of the greatest Western aristocracy. He worked with Randolph Scott on 6 films, including Bad Man's Territory, one of their most notable joint ventures. Now, subtlety wasn't precisely the goal of Bad Man's Territory. The screenwriters threw together every notorious criminal they could find in an attempt to draw attention to their black and white B-Western. There was Jesse James, Belle Starr, the Dalton Gang, Sam Bass, and more. Randolph Scott portrayed a refined Texas sheriff who was determined to bring the untamed borderlands under control and incorporate them into the Oklahoma Territory. With a lot of Western cliches crammed into its running time, the film sped from shootouts to political intrigue under the energetic but occasionally disorganized direction of director Tim Whelan. The James gang robbed a train in broad daylight to begin the narrative. Sheriff Mark Rowley, played by Scott, his younger brother and Deputy John, and another deputy called Mercer were pursuing them. The corrupt U.S. comes next. They didn't believe Marshal Bill Hampton's attempt to lead the posse in the wrong direction. They managed to keep on track and apprehend Kid Coyote, the outlaw lookout, who was played by Hayes. Of course. The situation rapidly deteriorated. Outlaw Hank McGee shot Mercer dead, and Hampton attempted to kill both John and Kid Coyote when John attempted to take him back to town. Suddenly, Jesse James intervened to stop him and transported the injured John to Quinto, a sanctuary for outlaws. In the meantime, Sheriff Mark rode into Bad Man's Land by himself to clear his brother's record, after Hampton fabricated the narrative to paint John as a member of the James gang. Mark met Henrietta Alcott, a resolute English journalist portrayed by Ann Richards, along the route. She joined the effort to bring justice to Quinto by encouraging others to join the new Oklahoma Territory, and romance blossomed organically. Outlaw meetings, square dances, political appointments, and horse races were all intercut throughout the picture, which concluded with the villains flipping the script by assigning Hampton to lead police enforcement and making the Rowley brothers the outlaws. The movie made almost $500,000 at the box office, despite its disorganized premise. Variety took notice of it as well and hailed it as suitable entertainment for grown-ups. As a result of the success, producer Nat Holt and Randolph Scott re-teamed for 1947's Trail Street, another Western with real-life characters that once again moved away from silly appeal and towards somber narrative. In Ray Enright's film Trail Street, Randolph Scott's character, the renowned Bat Masterson, entered the town of Liberal, Kansas, prepared to root out corruption and defend farmers from a hostile cattle magnate. It signaled a change in tone, combining its typical B-Western taste with a more sophisticated approach. Now a deputy, Gabby Hayes made a comeback and used his trademark sense of comedy to lighten the action-packed narrative. Jeffries portrayed a torn dance hall lady who harbored feelings for the villain, played by Steve Brody, who was also Ryan's opponent for Madge Meredith's devotion. Robert Ryan, who had just solidified his nasty reputation in Crossfire, played a noble banker embroiled in a land war. Masterson steadfastly supported the underdogs in an effort to bring order back as the story whirled through property conflicts, false charges, ambushes, and romantic entanglements. Then, in 1948, RKO released Return of the Bad Men, another film directed by Enright. Scott, Ryan, Jeffries, Hayes, and Brody were all back together in the movie, forming an Old West outlaw greatest hits lineup. The idea? To see what happens. Gather up all of the legendary villains, whether or not they have ever met, and toss them at Randolph Scott. Although the movie failed to live up to its idea, it should have been magnificent. Anne Jeffries reappeared as Cheyenne, Wild Bill Doolin's niece divided between passion and devotion, while Robert Ryan portrayed the Sundance Kid with a malicious flair. In a surprising turn of events, Hayes portrayed the president of a bank this time. Although the movie attempted to combine romance, politics, and gunfights into a single plot, the characters lacked nuance, and the love triangle ended with a whimper rather than a boom. Not even the huge land rush climax in Oklahoma was able to bring everything together. However, the Western boom was beginning to fade by the late 1940s. Demand was not as high as it once was, and tastes were changing. Hayes mounted up for his final journey on the Caribou Trail in the 1950s, set amid the untamed Canadian wilderness rather than the typical tumbleweed towns of the American West. This was a frontier adventure with a northern twist rather than merely a dusty saloon brawl. The show's star? One of Hollywood's steadiest hands is Randolph Scott. A large posse of well-known faces supported him: Bill Williams, Jim Davis, Dale Robertson, and, of course, Gabby Hayes. The cast was completed by Douglas Kennedy, James Griffith, and the always dependable Victor Jory, who played the evil Frank Walsh. In her role as Francie, the saloon owner, Karen Booth added charm and a hint of romantic tension. The narrative now begins with Scott's character, Jim Redfern, yearning for better opportunities. Along the famed Caribou Trail, he and his two friends, Mike, played by Williams, and Ling, played by Lee Tung-fu, are transporting cattle from Montana to British Columbia when they quickly run into problems. When they attempt to cross a toll bridge operated by the dishonest Frank Walsh without paying money, Walsh's thugs crush their herd in retaliation. The result is chaos. Mike loses his arm. There are no more cattle. Their lofty aspirations, for now, at least, crushed. In an attempt to start anew, Jim, Ling, and their new mountain man friend Grizzly, that is, Hayes, turn to gold digging. They are taken prisoner by native fighters just when it looks like things might improve. They do not escape together, though. Jim finds himself surviving in the bush by himself until he comes across a brook that is glistening with enough gold to start again. The crew soon reassembles. They connect with Will, a tough foreman, and Martha and Jane, Grizzly's relatives. They start a new cattle business together with the goal of bringing a new herd into the gold-rich region that Jim discovered. But they haven't been forgotten by former foes. Waiting to complicate things are Walsh and his crew. And Francie comes next. Walsh also wants her, but she has a sweet place for Jim. The already difficult path ahead is made more tense by that love triangle. Despite not aiming for the Oscars, the Caribou Trail was a good source of fun. Despite being only 81 minutes long, it has enough showdowns, cattle drives, and story twists to please any fan of Westerns. Production was handled by Nat Holt, while distribution was handled by 20th Century Fox. It's a bit of a mixed bag visually. The majority of the main characters never left California, although several scenes, particularly the second unit shots taken in Colorado, look stunning. Scenes from inside sound stages are intercut with actual outdoor footage from locations such as Griffith Park in Los Angeles' Bronson Canyon. You will know the scenery if you have hiked there. Here's another interesting tech fact. The majority of people only viewed the movie in black and white for decades, even though it was initially shot in 2 strips Cinecolor. That altered after more than a year of work by Kino Lorber, who brought it back to its natural hue. Finally, you may witness the Caribou Track as it was intended to be viewed. Golden vistas, dusty pathways, everything. Gabby Hayes did something that not all cowboys do after his time on the big screen with the Caribou Trail. He rode directly into the living rooms of America. That's correct. He started his career on television with the Gabby Hayes Show. This was no ordinary Western, though. Yes, our guy Gabby was paired with a bowl of morning oats, which is why it began in 1950 under a different name, the Quaker Oats Show. Imagine 1950. When Gabby Hayes came on TV, sitting in a basic shop in a dusty little area known as Quaker Canyon, children gathered around the TV, their eyes wide. While he was whittling, he would be weaving stories that somehow kept coming back to cereal. In a memorable moment in television history, Gabby would beg viewers to move away from the screen before aiming a cereal-loaded cannon directly at it. They used weapons to play off the Quaker Oats phrase in an entertaining way. Indeed, in 1951 the show's name was changed to The Gabby Hayes Show, but the appeal remained the same. It wasn't just a slapstick half-hour show. Historical events were the main topic of each program. On a small budget of around $5,500 each episode, the shows were produced live at NBC's Studio 3A at Rockefeller Center, with scripts written by Horton Foote and Jerome Coopersmith. Even yet, by the end of 1950, viewers in 39 American cities were tuning in to hear Gabby narrate stories about the Battle of the Alamo, Buffalo Bill as a youngster, the Lewis and Clark expedition, and other topics. Then, in December 1951, NBC debuted a brand new, accelerated, 15-minute daily edition of The Gabby Hayes Show. Initially broadcasting 3 times a week, it quickly established itself as a daily event at 5:15 p.m. The structure. Every now and again, Gabby would interject sequences from vintage B-westerns into his amusing fictitious tales about his fictional wild family. Because the show was so brief, they would spread out a single film across a week. And right when you thought it was finished, Gabby would return with another heart-stopping story. Rising stars like Betty Gard as Belle Starr and Ross Martin as Wyatt Earp were on the show in early 1952. Due to the intricacies of television schedules, Gabby's show's Sunday version was canceled by January 27, 1952. Nevertheless, the weekday version continued to be used until January 1, 1954. Gabby didn't put up his spurs just yet, even after that. Who took Buffalo Bob Smith's place on the Howdy Doody program when he had to leave to recuperate from a heart attack? That would be Gabby himself. Furthermore, Gabby was more than simply a TV personality, in typical cowboy manner. Appropriately dubbed the Gabby Hayes Ranch, he operated a summer ranch camp for both boys and girls in East Jewett, New York. However, Gabby's legacy extended beyond the screen. Last year's, Charlton and Fawcett released a whole comic book series in his name from the late 1940s to the 1950s, and he continued to appear sometimes after he left regular television, particularly on Howdy Doody, when he caught up with his longtime friend Buffalo Bob. Behind the bushy beard and the angry outbursts on film, there was a guy who was incredibly devoted to his wife. She was everything to him during their 43-year marriage. Directors may have provided him with performance remarks, but what really counted was his wife's assessment. George Gabby Hayes was devastated after his wife, Olive Ireland Hayes, passed away on July 5, 1957. The foundation of his personal life had been his marriage, which had endured for almost 40 years. In addition to being his spouse, Olive had been a vital source of support for his work. Following her death, Hayes first turned to his ranch in the quiet neighborhood of Toluca Lake, California, for comfort and familiarity. This ranch has long served as a tranquil haven from the bustle of the entertainment business, tucked away in a charming area close to the Hollywood studio system. It provided him with a peaceful setting in which to mourn, think, and be surrounded by the recollections of his life with Olive. In contrast to his sloppy, angry sidekick performances on screen, Hayes was known for his kind disposition and gentle manner in real life. He valued the seclusion and tranquility of the ranch's natural environs. However, as Hayes grew older and faced the physical difficulties that come with ranch life, the isolation of the lifestyle became less feasible. After some time, he decided to leave his country hideaway and live in a building of 10 apartments that he owned himself. This building, which was probably located in the Los Angeles region, was a reflection of Hayes's modest but astute real estate investments. This was a rare move for many stars of his day, but it revealed a more grounded side of him than his on-screen presence. He had greater access to healthcare, social engagement, and the support of friends and neighbors since he lived in this more compact, metropolitan area. Hayes maintained his modesty and friendliness in spite of his notoriety, and he was well-liked by residents and renters who valued having a genuine Western movie icon among them. Gabby Hayes experienced a severe decline in her health in the beginning of 1969. He was brought to St. Joseph Hospital in Burbank, California, a reputable medical center that has treated several celebrities in the past. Cardiovascular illness, which is prevalent among older persons, especially those of Hayes's generation, was the reason for his admission. His illness worsened even after he received all-encompassing care. Hayes died quietly on February 9, 1969, at the age of 83, following many weeks in the hospital. For innumerable admirers who had grown up seeing him in countless B-westerns in the 1930s and 1940s, where he had become the perfect comedic sidekick to stars like John Wayne, Randolph Scott, and Roy Rogers, his death signaled the end of an era. The Forest Lawn. Hollywood Hills Cemetery, one of California's most well-known cemeteries and the ultimate resting place of Hayes, is home to other prominent people from the golden age of Hollywood. Fans of vintage movies and classic westerns continue to find solace in his grave, which is surrounded by those of other movie icons. As the famous whiskered sidekick whose rough appearance always belied a heart of gold, Gabby Hayes established a lasting impact in American popular culture, despite the fact that he had long since withdrawn from film by the time of his death. In addition to his colleagues in the film industry, generations of fans who cherished him as a beloved mainstay of the cinematic world also lamented his loss. A Star's Ascent. Westerns ruled the screen during Hollywood's heyday, and every cowboy required a faithful companion. Gabby Hayes was one of the numerous people who played the character. His name is always toward the top of the list of iconic Western sidekicks, a relic of the genre's heyday. On May 7, 1885, Gabby Hayes was born George Francis Hayes. Under the leadership of Elizabeth and Clark Hayes, he was the third of 7 children in a large family. He frequently claimed to be from Wellsville, New York, but in reality, he was born in Stannards, a little village nestled away in the state's western region, not far from Pennsylvania. His father had a lot going on. In addition to operating the Hayes Hotel, he dabbled with the oil industry, which was only beginning to take off in that area. George was surrounded by his family, including his sisters Nellie and Hattie, as well as his brothers William, Morrison, and Clark. Morrison, his brother, served in the United States. George had a very typical small-town upbringing until being tragically murdered in battle during World War I. He attended Stannard School and was already displaying the beginnings of lofty aspirations. He played semi-pro baseball while still in high school, but he wasn't satisfied to remain in one place. He left home at the age of 17 in search of something more thrilling. He began his career with a touring stock group, worked for a circus for a while, and then settled into vaudeville. He was popular on stage, particularly in comedic pieces where he would portray the Rube Constable, a foolish figure. He had a great and busy vaudeville career for many years. George wed Olive E. Ireland in 1914. Her father was a glass finisher. Instead of remaining on the sidelines, Olive entered the entertainment industry and performed with her husband under the stage name Dorothy Earle. To be clear, she was not the same Dorothy Earle who was an actor and writer in the film industry. When 1928 finally arrived, George was doing well enough to take an early retirement. He and Olive believed they could finally unwind after settling into a house in Baldwin, Long Island. After the Great Depression struck, George lost everything in the 1929 stock market crash, just like a lot of other people. Their retirement dreams vanished in an instant. Olive had a fresh notion at that point. She encouraged George to try his hand at film acting. Together, they packed up their belongings and made the bold decision to travel west to Los Angeles. Hayes arrived in Hollywood just as the silent cinema era was coming to an end when he relocated to Los Angeles. He began by snatching anything he could find, including little roles, background characters, and small parts. At first, nothing significant. However, he soon had a fortunate encounter with Trem Carr, a producer. Carr noticed something in Hayes' expression. Then, over the course of the following 6 years, Carr had cast him in about 30 movies. Hayes portrayed a wide range of roles in the early days, including villains. He would occasionally even appear in the same film as two distinct characters. However, he truly found his calling in westerns. The same recognizable characters and sidekicks appeared in every serial western throughout those heydays. Although Hayes wasn't a cowboy off-screen, he blended in perfectly. It wasn't until he was in his 40s that he actually learned how to ride a horse. Hayes was a far cry from the grumpy, dusty personas he portrayed off-camera. He was well-groomed and eloquent and exuded a refined demeanor. Ironically, he didn't even enjoy westerns. To be honest, a lot of those B-movies were kind of boring and monotonous, which is why he thought they were. Nevertheless, people adored him in his tough, witty position as a sidekick. He gained notoriety for using terms like young whippersnapper, ya dern tootin, consarned, dadgummit, and dern persnickety female. He portrayed Wendy Halliday, the witty sidekick to William Boyd's Hopalong Cassidy, from 1935 to 1939, and soon established himself as a well-known figure in the Western world. However, he left the position in '39 due to a pay disagreement with Paramount Pictures. He made a crucial shift to Republic Pictures that same year, so he didn't sit out for long. There was only one problem. Republic changed his name to Gabby Whitaker since Paramount still held the name Wendy Halliday. Just a different name for the same endearing sidekick and crusty attitude. Alongside Roy Rogers, he rode in Southward Ho for the first time under the new brand. An illustrious run began with that movie. Roy Rogers and Gabby Hayes collaborated on an incredible 41 films between 1938 and 1943, making it one of the most successful collaborations in Western film history. The screen was illuminated by their chemistry. In addition to providing comedic relief, Gabby was witty, wise, and frequently the one guiding the hero. His mood remained constant, despite the fact that he altered the names of his characters from one film to another. Loyal yet grumpy, having a talent for expressing the right things. Under Western Stars was the beginning of their collaboration, which evolved into a Western film production. Red River Valley, Sunset Serenade, and Man from Cheyenne were just a few of the hits that kept coming. The audiences were captivated. Even though Roy was already a rising star, he acknowledged that Gabby had helped him develop as an actor. Gabby contributed the color, warmth, and comedy that made those movies so captivating, while Roy provided the charm and serene assurance. Yes, there were more outstanding pairs from that time period. Before he joined Rogers, Gabby Hayes was one of a number of sidekicks on William Boyd's Hopalong Cassidy, while Gene Autry and Smiley Burnett added a musical spin to the cowboy formula. However, None possessed the Rogers-Hayes team's emotional appeal or consistency. They were more than simply stars. They provided solace, especially during difficult times. Watching their films was like catching up with old acquaintances. They served as a reminder that no matter how difficult things became, good would always prevail. Do you believe old Hollywood friendships like this were deeper than we ever knew? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story surprised you or made you look at these two legends in a new light, give the video a like, subscribe, and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss another untold Hollywood story.